Why did the people who made this carving burn their own houses, rebuild them, burn their own houses again and rebuild them over and over for over 2,000 years? Where did they come from and where did they go? Hey, what's up? I'm Benjamin. What was the Cucuteni Trypillian culture and why was this name so long? Well, until the 19th century, this civilization was unknown to us. But in dual excavations in Cucuteni in Romania and Trypillia in Ukraine, two different people became aware of this civilization around the same time, and so 7 syllables Cucuteni Trypillia culture became its name. Sorry, Ukraine, I do support you in your fight, but I'm shortening this to Cucuteni, so I can say this over and over again without tying my tongue in knots. Alright, I'm Benjamin, and let's get into this culture that existed 7,000 years ago. Let's go. Despite all we do not know, we do know that other older and early contemporary cultures to the southeast, like the Starchevo culture and the Vincha culture, influenced the early formation and birth of this Cucuteni culture. During the 5th millennium BCE, yeah, that's a long time ago, clusters of pit houses emerged, which grew in number and changed into above-ground clay houses. Stretching into the fertile plains of the Pontic steppe, the Cucuteni culture flourished from 5200 to 3500 BCE, with a long period of decline after. This civilization covered an area as vast as France, from the Carpathian Mountains in the west to the Dniester River in the east, Kiev in the north with its forests, and the Danube River in the south. To understand this geographical footprint, it is vital to understand modern-day Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine. Archaeological investigations have shown that their settlements spread over an area of 350,000 square kilometers. That's massive. And within this immense landscape, these settlements, though separated by great distances, show remarkable likenesses in cultural practices, artifacts, and social norms. This suggests a complex communication network existed between them, despite these great distances and without horses for much of their history. This culture was likely held together by trade and commerce. This culture is believed to have built the largest Neolithic settlements in Europe, and to have used the plow, or an early version of it, the ard. They may have even used the wheel centuries ahead of Mesopotamia, though only children's toys with wheels on them have been found. However, they did use a weaving loom, and they did use a potter's wheel, millennia before Greece, and far before ancient Sumeria. Though the Cucuteni culture's pottery wheel was slower and more primitive, the pottery left behind is millennia ahead of its age. That's astounding. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about this culture is that it did something we just cannot explain. Ritual burnings of its own towns. At a site at Poduri in Bacău County, Romania, a site was found to have been burned 13 times in 60 to 80 year intervals, with buildings built on top of where the old buildings had stood and in the same design. To get to that and why, we need to explain what these people lived in. The Cucuteni culture naturally chose fertile areas near rivers, in rolling flatlands. However, in later centuries, they began to move to hilltops and plateaus, even caves later. Seems to have been a defensive strategy, but no mass graves have been found. Cucuteni culture settlements were typically a main settlement encircled by smaller connected ones. This was likely a strategy to share resources and trade. Many of these clusters had a mega site at their center, like Medinets in Ukraine, where up to 15,000 people could have lived. 15,000 at that time in history is a metropolis. Highly urbanized for its era and its area, and with perhaps 1 million people living within this civilization at its height. This would have been for a century or two before the rise of Sumeria in the 6th millennium BCE, the most urban society on Earth. Many of their dwellings, like those at Telyanki in Ukraine, were 2 stories tall. But we have no evidence they developed writing or mathematics, and they lacked many weapons of war, or even walls around their settlements in many cases. This suggests a highly egalitarian and peaceful society, which as the Copper Age moved in later, Cucuteni society began to form some class hierarchy. But for the time being, these clusters were remarkably like and same to each other, and lacking any suggestion of an elite caste. Civic structures of a kind at the center of these sites are suggestive of holy temples, and many female figurines have been found buried under these probable holy temples, where fires had burned these buildings to the ground. So why did this culture burn its own buildings to the ground around every other generation or so? I mean, we're talking about burning your own house down and then building it again within eyesight of the other site every other 60 to 80 years. That's like inconceivable to us today. Along the same pattern of structure in most cases as well. From what we can tell, this was not due to war. The patterns are regular. Some say this was possibly a way to get rid of pests or pestilence, which fire does get rid of disease and bacteria. Maybe that was a way that they found to combat disease. However, some say that this has another meaning, and recently I learned that many Jews blowtorch their kitchen to follow certain rules. And I'm not saying that these people are Jews, no. What I'm saying is there is a ritual essence to fire across many cultures, a religious sense that leans itself into further meanings and rituals. And some have suggested that these people looked at their houses themselves as having spirits that they gave birth to, and that they, because they brought them into this world, had to release them through death. That's eerie, isn't it? But think about it. Every other generation, so through the extent of human understanding of life in terms of memory at that time, you could not have a house that existed for more than the extent of a human memory. That's spooky, isn't it? They may have considered houses themselves to be spirits. I mean, this was a long time ago, so we don't know what these people thought, but a lot of these figurines and things are found underneath where the fires were, as if they were burying deities attached to these structures and burying those religious totems with them as they burned. They had a sense of meaning about their world, surely. But there's another twist. The frequency of these burnings increases over time towards the end of their civilization. And something's changing along the east. A strange people with a guttural language that does not glue words together, we Indo-Europeans, riding atop strong, swift beasts, horses, wearing glittering metals that are harder than their copper, bronze, with a sky god as compared to their earth goddess. This suggests that their world was in a flux of change that would have shaken everything they believed to its core. The Cucuteni civilization's ritual burning of houses shows just part of this people's bond to fire. They used fire in hardening the materials for their houses too, with clay floors, and to develop further their pottery, and the females likely connected to an earth goddess. They did not produce much copper earlier on. The coming of metal was a changing of their social hierarchy, which did not exist for most of their history. But the world around them, called Old Europe, which had existed for thousands of years before 4000 BCE, was by the 4th millennium BCE, changing all around them under the weight of Indo-European influences and new cultural ideas. For most of the 2,500 years this civilization stood, burning itself into life again over and over, Southeast Europe was in a transition to farming and moving from a Neolithic age of stone to the Copper Age, which slowly began the Bronze Age. The Copper Age is kind of a fusion of two ages, stone and bronze, slowly seeing more metal with the centuries passing. This civilization changed during this time, its pottery shifting from red to black and white in kilns with cords, like those of the southeast, to advances in pottery not seen anywhere else in the world at the time, made in kilns. And these kilns advanced technologically over the centuries of this civilization. They painted their pottery first, and then put them in the fire to burn the paint into the pottery. This was new, and later, copper tools and urban planning. Vast urban structures, larger than those in the Middle East. But these advances, along with changes in climate, a slow drying out over centuries, and economic inequality coming with copper and then bronze, creating social divisions and violence within their own society, along with ritual burnings of their own settlements, and then Indo-Europeans. It was likely a fusion of all of these things which led to their vanishing. In many places they abandoned their houses and moved toward the mountains in the west. We find artifacts in caves. There is no suggestion of a mass slaughter of these people. There was some conflict with Indo-Europeans, but it was not of any scale. And they just vanish, probably absorbed into the new population. But we don't know. They vanished like smoke. Nor do we understand why they were burning their own homes over and over again in cyclic rhythms. There was clear plan to it. But what do I think? Well, these people lived 4,000 years before Moses, 3,000 years before Stonehenge in many cases, and 7,000 years before us. I can't even conceive what that world would have been like, because even by that time, old Europe was already old. They had thousands of years of history before them that they must have conjured up some type of cultural memory from to do this, burning their houses in ritual rhythm. And I don't think I'm arrogant enough to assume that I know what these people believed in and thought, when I can barely understand, in a true sense, the Europe of 1,000 years ago. And this is 7 times as old as that. So I'm interested actually to know what you believe. What do you think these houses were being burned in cyclic rhythm every other generation or so for? And if you're interested in that kind of old Europe and what it led to later, watch this video on the Dacians in Romania. Thank you very much for watching. Diolch yn fawr iawn am wylio. Join me on Patreon to contribute to the channel, or buy me a coffee, leave a super like, and just for watching or leaving a like, thank you very much. We'll see you in the next episode.